Hello everyone and welcome to Serpente Sunday for October 9th, 2022. You have seen in many of my videos snakes out exercising on exercise stations, me training snakes on activity stations, and me taking the snakes to and from the vet in carriers and things. Have you ever wondered how I teach the snakes to voluntarily shift out onto these things? It really has been fairly simple with most snakes. Of course, occasionally there are some that are very shy and it is difficult to teach them the behavior, but for the most part, it's fairly easy to teach the snakes. So I'm going to talk this week about getting your snake used to stations, stands, and other stuff, because the first step in that process is really just getting them used to these things in the first place. Having snakes voluntarily move from one location, like their primary habitat, to another location is called shifting. Many times the snakes are being asked to shift onto or into something, like onto a scale, or into a temporary holding area, into a travel container, or just on other stuff. And it depends on the context of the situation and the species of snake. Zoos use shifting behaviors to shift wild animals from exhibit to off-exhibit holding and back. Many of those animals can't be handled. The keepers can't be in free contact with them, meaning sharing the same free space. And so it is very useful to have a shifting behavior, a cue that these animals are given so that they know when to shift from exhibit to a holding area, etc. What I use it for here is to get the snakes to shift out of their primary habitats for exercise or for training or into a carrier to go to the vet, or just to shift out and temporarily wait on a station so that I can do enclosure maintenance. My snakes aren't venomous, they're not dangerous, and so most of my stations and temporary holding areas are open air, meaning I'm in mostly free contact with the snakes when they're out on their stations. But if you're working with a dangerous snake, maybe a snake that's completely wild and you can't let them free, or it's a venomous snake, or for some other reason they need to be completely contained, you can teach them to shift into a completely contained space. That's actually how I handle my false water cobra. So let's talk about how to do this and what that looks like. First of all, I get this question a lot. Why cooperative care in the first place? Why not just intrude into the snake's habitat, forcibly remove them, and put them where you want them to be? Well, that's very, very disrespectful. It's very, very rude and potentially extremely frightening and distressing for the snake. And if somebody did that to me, I would become extremely violent. So cooperative shifting improves keeper safety, ease of care, and minimizes potential for fear, anxiety, distress, and defensive behavior in the snake. When something is done voluntarily, the action and all of the interactions surrounding that behavior have positive emotional affect versus something that is forced, which causes bad associations. So the choice to participate in their own care and the ability to opt out not only improves welfare, but also enhances the snake's well-being. Introducing snakes to stands, stations, and stuff starts with getting the snakes used to the things that you expect them to shift into or onto. And that can be done in a series of steps. And the first step is just getting the snakes used to seeing or smelling these things. Basically, it's just putting objects outside of the snake's enclosures, letting them get used to it as just another part of their environment. They may initially be afraid of these things. They may be neutral about them, so they don't have any feelings about them one way or another, or they could be curious about them. But before asking the snake to relocate to something, they first have to feel comfortable with whatever it is that you expect them to move to and that you expect them to remain on or in, whether for a few minutes or several hours. They have to feel comfortable and relaxed with that thing. So how do we get started? Well, just choose a time when the snake is awake, visible, comfortable, and relaxed, showing no signs of fear, anxiety, or distress. And no, don't go wake your snake up. Wait until they are naturally awake, and it is the time of day or night when they would naturally be active in doing activities. Just choose that time and then place an object in front of the enclosure that you would eventually like them to get used to and shift out onto or into. So you're going to place the object in front of the enclosure with the doors closed, and then you're just going to stand back and observe the snake's reaction. And you might do this 1 time, 3 times, 15 times, 20 times. You're just going to repeat that until the snake ignores that thing or is displaying curiosity about it. And if you notice that they're coming to the window or the door, or they're looking out of their enclosure at this object, they're tongue flicking, they're not shying away from it, then it's time to move on to step 3, which is when you're going to open the door with that object present. You're just going to move away and observe the snake's reaction. And again, you're going to repeat this behavior with the open door as many times as needed until the snake is so comfortable and relaxed with that item that they're hanging out of the door looking at it, they're tongue flicking at it. And some of the snakes will just come out and investigate it on their own. So you're going to repeat that until you're getting this very comfortable and relaxed interaction from your snake with the object. Whether they're touching it or not doesn't matter. If they're just really close to it and they're allowing it within their proximity and they're staying relaxed and are starting to get curious about it, that's what you're looking for. All right, here are the next steps if you get to that point. If the snake is voluntarily moving out of their habitat and onto the object, these snakes did that earlier. I don't know if you can see them behind me. Let me move for a second. I don't know if you can see that there's a couple of snakes out on these stations. And all I did when I saw that they were awake and at their door is I just opened their enclosure doors with these stations here, and they both actually came out on their own, and they're just moving around the stations. Now, I'm not doing any formal training with them this evening. They're just exercising and they're getting mental stimulation, and it's a good experience for them. I'm just trying to make sure that they don't have any bad associations with the experience tonight. So if they're getting to the point where they're doing this, you can periodically reinforce them with food in addition to just the simple freedom to explore. And this is a different type of reinforcement schedule than we would do with target training. With target training, we keep the snakes on a continuous reinforcement schedule, meaning every time they follow the target and they do their targeting behavior, they get reinforced with food or another specific thing that is paired with that exact target. But when we are getting them used to stations, the freedom to explore itself, the mental stimulation, the exercise, the activity itself is usually reinforcing. Freedom is a primary reinforcer for all organisms. But we can also occasionally reinforce them for being on the station with food by putting a puzzle activity on there and hiding food in it, by just hiding food on the station to create a foraging exercise. We can do that with a scent trail that leads them to the food. We can do a targeting exercise once they're on the station, or we could just feed them. That's just reinforcing that the stations are positive places to be and good things happen there. But because the station is reinforcing for tons of other reasons, and many times the snakes voluntarily come out onto it, you can reinforce with food intermittently on the stations. And it really goes in line with the snake's natural history, because they go to locations all the time in the wild where they think they may be successful locating food, probably because they've located food there before, but they don't always find it. And yet they return to these places every so often, because every so often they get food there. And that's how you're treating the station, as one of those locations that the snake can go to and seek out resources, and every now and then they're rewarded with finding food. Now, if the snake is comfortable around the object or station, but they're not moving out onto it on their own, and they seem to be in a holding pattern where they're just maybe sitting on the door threshold, or they're tongue flicking at it, maybe they're coming almost to the station with their head, but they haven't ever all the way come out, then if that snake is target trained, you can start doing a targeting exercise where you target the snake further and further out the door, closer and closer to the station, until they're completely targeting onto the station. And if your snake isn't target trained yet, what I would do is teach them target training within their enclosure, just the way you normally would, and then keep doing the gradual desensitization to the station, and then eventually pair those two activities together. And you are going to repeat having the snake station not only on this one object that you started with, but on various different objects until they're able to generalize the stationing behavior to almost anything you put out there in front of them. For example, in this photograph, Telemachus, one of my Morelia breadley, is stationed on a saddle, and we'll talk more about that shortly. All right, now we're going to watch some videos so that you can see what some of these goal behaviors or these shifting behaviors look like. Remember, for this very first initial step where we are just gradually desensitizing the snakes to the stations so that later on we can start formal training, you are just placing the stations within the snake's view, within their proximity, and you're letting them make the decisions, make their own choices about how they interact with that station or not. So the following video clips show snakes alert and at or near their doors and subsequently being allowed to investigate items outside of their habitats while a keeper remains nearby without interfering. At this point, you shouldn't be interfering or doing anything to encourage the snake, prompt the snake, or put pressure on the snake to come out. This is just them being allowed to passively habituate to the station. Snakes should be given the opportunity to investigate the objects or not, without any pressure from you and without any time limit. So if they choose not to engage with the object, if they choose to turn around and hide or get up on a perch or escape and avoid the object, that's their choice. You just want to continue to put the object there until they become used to it, until you can put it closer and closer to their enclosure without them escaping and avoiding. Remember that a keeper should always be nearby to observe and maintain safety. In this first video, this is Triangula, and you can see that she is already a great deal of the way out. And then this is her sister Andromeda, who is all the way out. So Andromeda came all the way out of her enclosure onto the tree here, the exercise tree, and Triangula is thinking about it. I asked Andromeda to come out first, so she's actually been on the station longer than her sister, and these two are twins. They don't share the same enclosure, but they shared the same egg as they were developing. Now this is Mesmer. So while those two Morelia breadley were very eager to come out and very brave and curious and bold, and it really only took each of them just a few seconds to come out of their door, and then probably less than 30 seconds apiece to all the way come out onto the station, you may have a snake that's extremely shy, extremely reactive to environmental stimuli, and is basically terrified and worried about everything. And that's the case with Mesmer. Mesmer is a Python Regis, and it is amazing, amazing that he is even out of his enclosure threshold with part of his body. Now the station is just sitting there, and I'm putting no pressure on him. Notice that he didn't even look directly at it for the longest time. He was moving sideways, I think looking at it out of the corner of his eye, because I could see his head slightly moving in its direction a little bit at a time. I'm talking like millimeters at a time, until he finally got brave enough to look at it directly. This is the first time he's tongue flicking at it. And so he is being extremely cautious about investigating the station, and no, it's not the first time that he's seen it. So he has made, for him as an individual, tremendous progress to, first of all, even be out of his hide while I'm there, while the doors are open, and while there's a station there, let alone he's brought his body part way out of his enclosure threshold, and he got very close to the station and investigated it. Now he has pulled his body back in, and you may see that. You may see tons of approach and retreat on the snake's part until eventually they build up the confidence to come out and investigate that station more fully, or even to come out all the way and position themselves on the station. This is Himmer. Himmer came out onto the station the first time he saw it. He was at his door pretty much from day one of him getting here, and I rolled several different stations up adjacent to his enclosure, first to his quarantine tub and then to his enclosure, and he just came out. So I didn't do anything to have him learn this behavior. He is just a curious snake. He doesn't seem to be afraid of things, and he was at his door a lot. I put a lot of stuff next to his doors and just started opening them, and he just came out. That's the snake we wish we all had, but as we know, they aren't all like this. This is Rodney, And she's demonstrating a time when she decided she's not going to shift out. And I wanted to show you what that looks like. And if the snake opts out, if they choose not to shift, if they choose to disengage with an activity you have set up for them, that's fine. It's their choice. You wouldn't be doing this in a situation where it was an emergency and they had to go to the vet or you had to evacuate. You do this as a training exercise, a familiarization exercise to lead you to the way to formal training. So if they opt out of the activity on a specific day or night, that's fine. They can do that. They don't have to engage with the activity. That's part of choice-based interactions, choice-based handling, and cooperative care. Here is just actually a few minutes later when Rodney turned around and decided that she was going to come out. Now, when I taught Rodney this behavior, she initially came out onto something I attached to her enclosure ledge or to her enclosure threshold, creating a ledge. And then I rolled activity stands up to her enclosure and she made her way down those to the tent. And so this was a whole process. We didn't just go from her 6 feet up, climbing down into an exercise tent. There were lots of steps along the way until she learned how to do this and felt comfortable skipping the targeting, skipping the taller station, skipping the ledge, and just going directly from her enclosure down into the tent. I'm going to go over each of those steps in a future video so that you can train this behavior step by step. Now, with these exercise tents, I treat them just like the stations. Occasionally, there's food in them for the snakes to find, and sometimes there's not. And that is exactly how it would be if they left their den and they went out hunting in the wild. Sometimes they'd be successful and they would end up finding food, and sometimes they wouldn't, but it doesn't stop them from trying again and going back to the same locations, because guess what happens intermittently? They do find food. So intermittently, I reinforce Rodney and the other snakes when they're in the exercise tent. This is an example of Telemachus leaving the saddle that I used for his station and going back into his enclosure. Many times you will find that the snakes come out and then decide they like being out, they like their freedom. There's actually a biological imperative for organisms to feel like they have freedom and agency over their own behavioral outcomes. They often don't want to go back into an enclosure that they know is going to be closed up and they can't get back out of. So I often will reinforce the snakes for going back into the enclosure by setting up a food puzzle in there for them, targeting them back in and reinforcing them with food, or giving them something else inside the enclosure they find reinforcing. Telemachus loves water. He loves to swim. And I had cleaned his enclosure while he was out, but not only that, I gave him fresh water in his swimming pool, and I gave him fresh drinking water. And one of the things that he immediately did when he put himself away is investigate the water. He looks out the door and he thinks about coming back out. And I do let them go in and out if that's what they choose to do. I want them to realize they can go in and out, that the door is just not going to be shut immediately when they go back in. But he's checking out his water. For Telemachus, water's super reinforcing. And so I gave him a few minutes to check out his pool and his water, and I went ahead and shut the door. And I just wanted to show you here that I have this saddle on a stand that's on wheels, and I can roll it up to the enclosures and then back out of the way when I'm done. And that was just an improvised station. I actually haven't used that as a station before, but I had other snakes out and it was Telemachus's turn. I didn't want to wait for the other snakes to be put away, so I thought I'll just use this saddle. And Telemachus is 6 years old, very experienced. He generalizes this stationing behavior on almost anything I put up next to his enclosure. And that's ideally the point that we want the snakes to get to. Because if they can generalize the behavior on different stations at home, they're more likely to generalize the behavior at the vet, say to come out of their carrier and station on a scale or a perch or an exam table and then shift back into their carrier at the vet. So just a brief timeline of how this habituation is going to look, just getting them used to it, is you've got your snake here, you're going to let them see the station or the carrier or the object. You're going to let them investigate it while it's close by. And then hopefully your snake decides at some point that they're going to move out onto it, but you let them move onto it if and when they choose. And then down the road, you can always encourage them to station through targeting. Important guidelines that you really need to remember when you're working on stationing behaviors, especially just this initial part where you're just strictly getting them used to the stations so they're not afraid of it, is choose stations that are safe, that are attractive to the snake according to their species' natural history. That means if you have an arboreal snake or a semi-arboreal snake, it's very attractive to them to be able to come out of their enclosures and climb on things. So if you can set up things for them to climb on, they're much more likely to readily come out of their enclosure than if, say, I had just set a flat table outside of their enclosure with nothing on it, or if I set a pool of water outside of their enclosure. That's not going to be as attractive to them. However, if I have a semi-aquatic snake, or if I have a terrestrial snake and I set things on a flat surface outside of their enclosure, like water, like substrates, like things they could burrow in or bury in, that's going to be attractive to those types of species. So make sure that whatever your station is, that it makes sense for the species that you're working with, and that they're able to grip onto it, that they're able to feel safe, that they're able to feel secure. Provide opportunities for the snake to get used to these items on their own before you begin any formal training exercises with them at all. No formal training yet. You're just letting them get used to the stuff. And then you want to make sure that the snakes are used to the stations or shift containers, trained in the ways that you expect them to interact with these shift containers or stations or tables or other objects, and that they can generalize the behaviors to lots of various different objects before you actually start using them for actual care, transport, veterinary, educational, or other activities. So you really want to make sure that the shifting behavior is solid and that they can generalize it to various things, various contexts, various situations, various rooms in your home before you start actually trying to use it for a real life. All right, in summation, this presentation was just to show you how to introduce stations to snakes, allowing them to get used to them or passively habituate to them in their own time. And not just stations, but any exercise equipment that you want your snake to use or would like to encourage your snake to use, you would get them used to it in the same manner. Like this is a hammock that Sunspear is using to get from her enclosure across the room over to an exercise area that is set up in a different room. Later videos will go through the individual shaping plans, detailing the procedures step by step for station training, including targeting to stations. So I have those series of step-by-step target training videos. I am starting on a series that will be step-by-step station training videos. So don't worry, this is just a preliminary video to introduce you to this concept. Remember that many sessions and many stops pave the way between the snakes first seeing the station and routinely moving to it when cued. When they hit those stops or those roadblocks, don't get discouraged. Just keep doing what you're doing, and eventually the snakes will get past that. If they accidentally have a bad experience, just take a few steps back. You may even have to start over from the beginning, but you just want to facilitate this process and let the snakes decide that this is an activity that's safe for them to do in their own time. There is more than one method to formally train each approximation for this behavior, including capturing, targeting, luring, prompting, molding, or modeling, and even from the snakes watching other snakes perform the behavior. So I am going to go over all of that in later videos, and I'll go through all of the process step by step. Remember, it's going to take several sessions, but within each session, you're going to have different approximations that you want to meet. And then several sessions down the road, you're going to get closer and closer to the goal behavior, which is the snake shifting out onto the station. I want you to meet the team that helped me make this video today, even though they didn't know they were doing it. We've got Himmer, a Python Regis, Telemachus, a Morelia Bredli, Mesmer, a Python Regis, and Rodney, a bull snake, Pituophis catnifer sayi. The rest of our team, or our extended team, who weren't prominent in videos, but I used their photographs and short video clips of them, were Sarek, a Python Regis, Kenobi, a Python Regis, Feather, a Python Regis, Normal, Pantherophis guttatus, which is a corn snake, Sunspear, a Morelia Bredli, Andromeda and Triangula are twin Morelia Bredli, and Katesh, a Morelia Bredli. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you spending your time with me today and opening up your minds to cooperative care and learning how to start working with your snakes with choice-based interactions, because it's going to not only enhance their well-being and increase their welfare, but it's going to increase the enjoyment that you get out of your relationship with your snake. If you have any questions or points for discussion, you can email me at behavioreducationllc@gmail.com. You can go to my website at behavioreducation.org. If you want one-on-one individual video chats, phone calls, text messages, or if you'd like to do group live chats, consider becoming a patron, and you can find me on patreon.com/behavioreducation. I'm also on social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and of course, Patreon. Thank you again so much. And until next time, always remember to please be kind and love your animals.